Okay, so some good news here, and something Saagar and I, no doubt, I think, agree on. Let's put this up on the screen. So we've talked about this rent collusion price fixing algorithm that has been used by RealPage. It's this software company called RealPage. It's basically, I'll get into a little bit of the technical details, but they go into a city. They have many of the landlords in the city feed in their data about what they're renting their apartments out for. And then the algorithm uses that data to recommend and basically to pretty much force on these different landlords the optimal highest rent price. And so, the collusion isn't happening directly in person. It's happening through the back door of this algorithm, but it's happening nonetheless. And so we've seen indications that this may happen. Now we have the official announcement that the Justice Department could, together with the Attorneys General of North Carolina, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Minnesota, Oregon, Tennessee, and Washington, filed a civil antitrust lawsuit today against RealPage Incorporated for its unlawful scheme to decrease competition among landlords in apartment pricing and to monopolize the market for commercial revenue management software that landlords use to price apartments. RealPage's alleged conduct deprives renters of the benefits of competition on apartment leasing terms and harms millions of Americans. I just want to read a little bit of what the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General had to say about this, because I actually thought that they framed this really well. Merrick Garland said, Americans should not have to pay more in rent because a company has found a new way to scheme with landlords to break the law. We allege RealPage's pricing algorithm enables landlords to share confidential, competitively sensitive information and align their rents. Using software as the sharing mechanism does not immunize the scheme from Sherman Act liability, and the Justice Department will continue to aggressively enforce the antitrust laws and protect the American people from those who violate them. The Deputy Attorney General added, training a machine to break the law is still breaking the law. Today's action makes clear that we will use all our legal tools to ensure accountability for technology-fueled anti-competitive conduct. Kudos to them for bringing this suit. Kudos to all the states that are involved here. It's nice to see, I'm not sure if the Attorney General of North Carolina is a D or an R. Most of them are Democratic states, but you've got Tennessee in there too, which is also encouraging to see, because this is part of what has helped to drive rent increases. Based on this algorithm, Saagar, they have even found that these apartments can make more money if they hold some of their rentals off the market. They basically charge too high of a price for them to lease out all of their apartments. But they found that, marginally to be more beneficial. So not only are you jacking up rents, you're also effectively taking some rental stock off of the market, and it's having increasingly devastating impacts on specific rental markets where this has really taken hold around.
Ironically, this is probably the most net benefit to the red states and specifically to a lot of these swing states. So I talk a lot about population inflows, and part of the reason red states are actually flourishing right now is not just or I guess purplish states, places like Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, obviously more of a red state, is because they don't actually have a lot of housing regulation on their books in the same way. So you're allowed to build a ton of housing. The problem, though, is that you have huge influxes of people that are coming in, and part of the not only natural rent decreases happening, it's that a lot of the construction is specifically financed by these large corporate landlords that own these gigantic, the glass buildings. Anybody who's been in a downtown area of Nashville and Austin or any of these places, North Carolina, anywhere, Raleigh, knows what I'm talking about. Well, those apartment buildings then are specifically the ones who are using these types of algorithms. And then that is also being backpacked on by a lot of the other landlords that are in the area. And I mean, at a certain point, you can't fault a landlord, I guess, for wanting to have higher price. But what you can fault
I can fault
is,
a landlord.
Look,
I can definitely fault a landlord.
Here's my one. There are a lot of landlords in this country.
Not these ones we're talking about here. Not these ones.
Okay, I'm just saying, a lot of landlords are actually just people who own one extra property. It's the tail end are the real problem, and they're the ones who set up all of this private equity machinations that make everybody else have a worse name. But the point really is just that this is in the general interest of the government, because in this particular case, especially red states and others, if you want to keep that population inflow coming, for example, Arizona, North Carolina, and Texas are the three places where you see young people specifically coming and really flourishing, actually, because of the comparative income income versus housing ratio. You cannot let the same thing happen there that happened in New York, DC, Chicago, Los Angeles. So this is genuinely in their best interests. And because, I mean, that's one of the things I was really heartened by from work from home is we have to make sure that other areas of the country are also dynamic and attractive to people who are young, and so that you don't just get like super majority concentrations of like the best and the brightest, quote unquote, who flock to these places. Because the other problem is, for every person who makes it in DC, there are 9 or 10 others who are saddled with 200 grand in student loan debt and barely trucking along and able to make rent. And those are the people really who are the most preyed upon by this system. That
no, that's absolutely right. And so it's 100% in states' interests. It's in the interests of certainly the consumers, renters, but we also have to acknowledge these private equity companies that own some of these firms, or the giant corporate landlord management companies. Like, these are major political figures who throw a lot of money around in politics as well. So that's why there's no guarantee that, even though you look at this and you're like, of course, this makes all the sense in the world, there's no guarantee that something like this would ultimately happen. Let's skip forward to D3. Just to show you again a little bit of the impact here. Credit as always to our friend Matt Stoller, who runs the big Substack and does a fantastic job covering these types of competition issues and actions by the federal government. Previously, when it was starting to look like actually the FBI raided one of these big corporate landlords, something we covered and took note of on the show, this is the Atlanta area, and all of these dots on the map are properties that are using this RealPage software. So again, it's basically just a fancy collusion scheme that uses an algorithm rather than in-person price fixing to get the job done, and is extremely sophisticated. So you can see how widespread in certain markets are. And to your point, obviously Atlanta is kind of politically important right now. So, makes sense that Democrats would want to show some action with regard to taking on the high cost of housing and rent. Kamala Harris mentioned RealPage as well. I don't know if she used the name in particular, but she referenced this algorithmic price fixing and rental collusion. Put D2 up on the screen just in terms of some of the specifics from the complaint that we can get into here that were noteworthy. So this is Lindsay Owens on Twitter says, pricing advisors ensure landlords are taking the high prices the computer spits out and escalates cases where landlords aren't obeying the machine, then calls them into the principal's office to give them a refresher on goals. So just pause here for a second before we go to the next one. What she's underscoring here is, yes, this was algorithmic, but also there were a lot of human beings involved here in enforcing the collusion level pricing. Because one of the quote unquote problems that the landlords and RealPage face is when you have actual human beings who are thinking about whoever it is, that single mom in that apartment struggling to afford rent, they may get a little soft-hearted and not want to do the whole rental price increase that the computer system is telling them they should do. So they have all of these in-person mechanisms to pressure landlords to guarantee that they are taking those high prices and gouging their own customers as much as possible. Go ahead and put the next piece up on the screen. She gives another example here. She says, in addition, a team of staff makes tens of thousands of calls to landlords every month to collect non-public, competitively sensitive information, including occupancy rates, prices, floor plan, info on concessions, lease terms, and more. So again, it's not just the machine. These are real human beings who are gathering that data to be able to more effectively collude. Put the next piece up on the screen. She says it takes a lot of elbow grease to execute a price-fixing conspiracy at this scale, and thousands surely played a role, but the algorithm is also more sinister than I expected. The software is designed with auto-accept features to ensure landlords adopt pricing recommendations. So again, to take any sort of like human compassion out of the equation, you can just check the auto-accept box, and then the high prices are automatically put into action without any sort of human being having to feel bad about what they're doing to these consumers. Put the next piece up on the screen. She says it also has a hard floor to ensure prices don't drop too low, sold out mode that recommends the maximum rent charged by a property's competitors, even if the floor plan's previous price was far lower, and revenue protection mode to ensure prices don't dip in downturns. So effectively, again, we can, she goes on a little bit from there, but those were some of the key points. effectively putting in mechanisms to make sure that rental prices aren't actually responsive, really, to markets, that they maintain high prices, even if you have a market dip that ordinarily would make it so that rental prices were more affordable. And, if you look at the prices in these metro areas where RealPage has been a factor, you can see that RealPage has accounted for a significant portion of rental price hikes. That is, housing is one of the key issues that we hear over and over and over again. That clearly, Kamala Harris has realized this is also a problem, and that's why she's attaching some political significance to it as well, because what could be more core to that aspiration to live a secure middle-class life than just being able to afford a decent home, be able to make rent in a decent apartment building, and not be gouged through the teeth every time they have a chance to hike rental prices.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And, if she ran on it more, she'd be better off. There's some talk of it, I think, in some of the more recent ads. But there's a lot of questions, too, about who she would even have in her admin. I mean, people like Tony West, her brother-in-law and top advisor, would definitely not be, for this stuff. Because that's the irony, is that a lot of these startups and other places in Silicon Valley rightfully pitch themselves because they're like, you can actually make a lot of money in terms of fees. So she does remain very, how would I say, very almost like a blank slate. You can see almost anything that you want to see in terms of what her housing policy would look like.
One of the things that was really encouraging is she brought on Brian Deese, who has been one of the people in the Biden administration who has been most aggressive about this sort of competition policy.
Interesting.
And that was something that, the Matt Stollers of the world and David Dayen, et cetera, really took heart in, because certainly Tony West is a troubling figure in the other direction. But Brian Deese, she brought on as an economic advisor, and like I said, has been one of the best actors in the Biden administration. So that was seen as a really encouraging sign, as was, of course, picking Tim Walz as vice president in terms of the agenda that he's pushed forward in the state of Minnesota. So, she has leaned into, in that economic speech she gave, she leaned into housing affordability, and both on the side of the competition piece, which is important, and also the building more piece, which is also important. I think you have to put those two pieces together. Will she actually do it? That's another question.
Great question.
That's another question.
Right. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.